Welcome to The Human Experience, a podcast about the stories we live out every day and the importance of championing the vulnerability and courage of the storyteller. I'm your host, Jennifer Peterkin, and it was through my own lived story of experiencing domestic violence that this podcast was created. By traveling the globe and interviewing each guest in person, I am convinced now more than ever that stories have the power to change the world. You can join our community of storytellers by subscribing, leaving a rating and review, signing up for my newsletter, following me on Instagram, and more. Thank you for being here. In a world full of noise, to listen with intention is an act of resistance. John, thank you so much for meeting with me today, for inviting me into your home and being willing to do this interview in person. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your time, and I'm excited to dive into your story a little bit.
All right. Well, welcome, Jennifer, and hope you're having a good time in the Carolinas. You've come at just the ideal time of year, post-pollen and pre-humidity. So I hope you get a chance to enjoy our city and our state while you're here.
Yeah, I have some time this weekend, so I'm going to go do some exploring. I'm excited about that. Yeah.
Wonderful. Enjoy.
Thank you. So, John, you have a story that takes you all over the United States. I mean, your story starts in California, right? But we're in North Carolina now, so.
Indeed. Yes, I tell people I'm bicoastal. And I did grow up just south of San Francisco in an area that's now Silicon Valley, but was not known as Silicon Valley back in the 1950s. And had 18 wonderful years, went to the same school system for all 13 years. And then when it came time for college, all right, here I'm going to out my brother, throw him under the bus. My brother did not do well at UC Berkeley. And so my folks said, well, we won't make that mistake again. And they sent me to a sort of a seminary of sorts called the University of Iowa.
Okay.
They figured I couldn't get into too much trouble in the middle of a cornfield.
Were they right?
For the most part, just, nothing on my record.
That's good. Okay.
But I got 3 wonderful things. I got two degrees in mathematics and economics and a wife. So I think that's 3 pretty good accomplishments in 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting to me that you got a degree in mathematics because, I'm here, you're a writer. You were a pastor before that. And so it's like these whole different lifetimes that you've lived.
Yeah. Well, my father literally was a rocket scientist.
Okay.
Literally, he was a charter employee of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. He got his PhD in mathematics at Stanford. And so it was just natural that he would move me along in that department, in those endeavors. And I was decently good at it. Came to me fairly naturally. I was good, but not brilliant like he was. And so mathematics was an area in which I did well. But I wanted to team that up with economics to put it into real world application. I certainly was not a theoretical mathematician, and nor was my father. So those two things, I think, were a natural fit. And given the era in which I was in college in the 1960s, there was a growth of our governmental programs through civil rights and the Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. So it all just sort of came together naturally, organically, and that's how I ended up at the University of Iowa getting 2 degrees.
Yeah. Is a job in that what brought you east?
At that point, Lyndon and I wanted to continue. I wanted to get closer to Washington. That's the short answer. I have in my book, East of Apple Glen, and I relay an experience in which Nathan goes to Washington as a junior high school or high school student and is just overwhelmed by the city, by the limousines, by the people in three-piece suits, by the briefcases, by the Washington Post, and of course all the monuments and symbols of our society. And again, given the growth of government programs and so forth, I figured Washington, D.C. would be where I would end up or start off a career.
Yeah.
So I didn't quite get to Virginia or Washington, D.C., but I did get to Chapel Hill, which, of course, as everyone knows, is the southern part of heaven, and continued with my studies in economics at Chapel Hill.
Okay. Yeah. So you mentioned your book, East of Apple Glen, which you just published in April of this year.
Correct.
And we're kind of jumping forward, but it's because I want to jump back.
Sure.
So East of Apple Glen is your second book, but your first novel. Is that correct? Or are they both novels?
They're both novels.
Oh, okay. I apologize. So East of Apple Glen is your second novel. And from what I understand, you draw a lot on your experience as a pastor, which is the next part that we're going to dive into. But it's a fictional book based on some of your experiences. Is that correct?
That is correct. And as my wife and I say, changing the names to protect the guilty.
I read that on your website and I thought that was fantastic. I was like, that is a really, I like that. I might use that.
Please.
So if you want to briefly describe the book, or should we go into your pastor life first? I don't know which way you want to do this, because they both kind of need each other to talk about.
Yeah, it might make more sense maybe to talk a little bit about pastoral ministry. And after getting out of school, I spent 20 years as a health economist.
Okay.
And that was a wonderful career. I could have ridden that wave all 40 years and done very well. But I got to tell you, after 20 years, I just got tired of doing spreadsheets. It just sort of collapsed under the weight. I was dealing with numbers, 40 hours a week and very little with people. The office I had, I said it had no windows and no doors. It was just filled with computers and data and analyses, and very little to do with people. And we were active in our church. And I remember there was one Sunday where our minister went on vacation, and he asked, it was a very small congregation, so he asked me if I would deliver the sermon that Sunday. And at the end, of course, you have a very supportive congregation there. They said, someone came up to me and said, "John, I think you missed your calling." So that just planted a seed in the back of my mind, having I really, I'd spent 20 years doing health as a health economist. Had I really missed my calling? And I took a couple of years just to do some further exploring before entering seminary. And would you repeat the question? What then?
No. Actually, then where did you go to seminary?
So we lived in this home on Folger Drive in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we took our three youngest kids to seminary. I remember our number two boy, our actually oldest boy, number two in birth order.
Okay.
He went off to Appalachian State, and I went off to seminary in St. Louis. And so we left this 3-bedroom, 2,500 square foot home and moved into about a 900 square foot dormitory apartment. It was like a 3-year camp out.
Oh, wow.
But it was a wonderful 3 years for us in Webster Groves, just a suburb just west of St. Louis. And that's where I completed my Master of Divinity and then was ordained in the United Church of Christ.
Okay. And where I know you've served in a few different churches in a few different states. So what was the trajectory there? So
from there, my first congregation that called me was in rural Ohio, eastern Ohio, and Wayne County, to be specific, which is Amish country, about 100 miles south of Cleveland in round numbers. And it seemed idyllic to have a town of 279. With our family, we made it up to 284. We were the only church proper within the city limits, but it soon became apparent that there was a bit of there was different backgrounds that came to intersect there. Our background being urban and educated, and in that community was very rural, small businesses, small schools, farming, and very politically and socially conservative. And so that created sort of a nexus there for difficulties in having a successful ministry in that community.
Yeah.
But ministers, I don't know if you're familiar with the book by Lois Lowry, The Giver. Mm-hmm. The protagonist there, the older man, is called the receiver. And he receives all the memories and all the pain of his community. And without taking that analogy too far, I felt myself somewhat as a receiver, that people would approach me with whispers and secrets. I was an outsider, so to that extent I was safe, because any insider, you tell a secret in a small town, and soon nobody's business is everybody's business. Mm-hmm. And I was a safe receiver to that extent. And so I received many whispers and many secrets, which was sort of ironic, because I really was did not have a very fun time, did not have a very successful time by the metrics of a vibrant, growing church. Mm-hmm. But in terms of being a safe place for people to come and share, and I guess you could say that was a successful 3 years.
Which I would say that's successful, but that is how I would measure success. So was this specifically an Amish church, or did you have a lot of Amish people attending?
No, definitely not. The Amish and English meaning anyone who's not Amish. I mean, you can be Chinese or African American, you're still English. The Amish and English interact. They can have business and light social relationships, but no deep connections or friendships in that regard. No, the Amish are old order Mennonites. They divide themselves into districts, and no cars, no telephones, very plain dress, no electricity, and they divide themselves into districts, and they have a bishop. I was with the United Church of Christ, which came out of, I think that part of Ohio was settled by Swiss people. So that church was maybe 150 years old at the time. It had been settled back in the 1800s. So we were a mainline Protestant church, if I can use that description, but very separate from the Amish and their own theologies.
Yeah. So it's very interesting that they chose to talk to you.
Well, again, I think I was a safe place. I think I was trained. I had a seminary degree, 3-year degree in theology and biblical studies. And the bishops, the leaders in Amish churches, are chosen by lot. So there's no theological training whatsoever, at least there's no requirement. So when a bishop dies or retires or whatever, they put the names of the men, and of course have to be men. They put their names on strips of paper and put those strips of paper in a Bible. Mm-hmm. And whoever's name is drawn out of the Bible becomes the bishop. And that's sort of seen as for those biblical readers, that's how Matthias was chosen to replace Judas, biblically chosen by lot. Mm-hmm. So they see that as God's will, that person is chosen. then it's up to that person to become the expert, if you will, and deal with biblical issues of the community. What can they wear? What tools can they use, and so forth. But that, speaking generally, their understanding of the Bible is literal. Mm-hmm. And for people who have read the Bible and studied the Bible, there are many layers beneath the surface, and sometimes those escape those who stop at the literal or don't have an opportunity to go beyond the literal. Mm-hmm. Let me say it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm from an area in Pennsylvania that isn't far from Lancaster, which is Amish country in Pennsylvania, at least. So I have a small understanding. I know who the Amish are, you know, and I think there's people in the United States and also the world that just don't know who the Amish people are. So, but I would say there's almost this like romanticization of the Amish as like this very simple and meek, mild. And that's not to say that that's not true, but it's a very oversimplification, I think, of what actually happens in communities like that, because they're so inward. Everything is within. No outsiders allowed, as you've already spoken to. So what would you say to someone, I guess, first of all, who doesn't really understand what Amish is? Mm-hmm. And then beyond that, someone who looks at that and says, oh, wow, that's a really nice, you know, community they have going on there. Like that looks perfect or idyllic.
Yeah, I totally agree. From the outside looking in, there is an idyllic view. Getting rid of cell phones and 24/7 news cycles and so forth, it does make sense that, yes, I'd like to try that. And getting back to nature and planting your own food and garden and raising your chickens and all those sorts of things. And you're also correct. There is the romanticizing. Just go to a library and look at the Amish romance novels.
Yes. Yes.
And it's kind of boy meets girl, you know, and after a week, maybe they touch hands and you go down that road and then fade to black.
Yeah.
But they are human. Mm-hmm. Everyone is human. And in the Amish country, there are issues of alcoholism and drug abuse and sexual issues going on. And what the whisper that came to me that shocked me and lives with me to this day was when an Amish woman, again, she pulled me around a corner so no one could see us talking with each other. And she said, what does Matthew 18:18 mean? All right. Well, so we opened up the Bible, and it said something to the extent that whatever is bound on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever shall be loosed on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Okay. What was the question behind the question was that the teenage boys in her district were wanting sex. And they were using that as a leverage that if they didn't get their way, they would go English. They would leave the community. And within the Amish belief system, you're either in or out. There's no... I saw very little grace. Mm-hmm. There's no reconciliation. Once you go English, you are shunned. Maidung is the name they use. And once you are out, you are out. And so there's a tremendous ethos to remain within the system, because if you're not in, you're gone forever. Mm-hmm. It's like they died. So so they go to the bishop and say, well, what are we going to do? And the bishop is going through his Bible, and he sees Matthew 18:18, whatever shall be bound in heaven shall be bound on earth, loosed on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And he interprets that from a literal standpoint, that if you bind a family on earth, they will be bound in heaven. But if you lose the family on earth, it'll be lost even in heaven. Mm. So there's no reconciliation. Not only will there be no reconciliation on earth, there'll be no reconciliation in heaven. And that goes so far beyond their belief system that they said, well, I guess a little incest would be better to keep the family together. Well, that's not what that scripture means. What that scripture means is whatever is bound, meaning the laws of heaven that bind you in heaven, bind you on earth, and whatever is allowed in heaven, loosed in heaven, shall be the same on earth. A totally different 180-degree interpretation, different interpretation from what that bishop came up with to justify incest within their community. So that's I shared that with the woman, and I said, but look, this is totally illegal. We need to call the police. We need to call social services. This is an outrage. There's no way this should be allowed. And at that point, then the wall came up, the curtain came down, however you want to say it. She said, we take care of our own. We don't call the police. We don't let social services within our community. We take care of our own. And she disappeared within her community, her friends, and to my knowledge, I never met or saw her again. Mm. And I always wondered, what happened?
Yeah.
What happened? And that conversation took place about 30 years ago. Mm. So it's been, I think I said in my afterword, it was a germ of an idea that just stuck with me. And I knew I had to get that out of my head, out of my heart, and onto paper.
Yeah. I'm so glad you did. Yeah. You know, I have so many thoughts running through my head and so many questions I want to ask you. But as you were talking about the interpretation of that from that bishop and how, you know, keeping the family together was more important than any other virtue, any other command. And it just makes me think, so I am a domestic violence advocate, and anybody that's been listening to the podcast has probably heard me say that 100 times, but it just makes me think of, you know, I was in my own domestic violence situation and I was married and I sought divorce after going through that. And there were people and there still are people. And again, being an advocate, I fight against this all the time, that just divorce is the line that you can't cross. And so it doesn't matter whatever happens underneath that. Like all of that can be justified because the system in place to make sure that marriages stay intact is more important than the actual lives of people. And most of the time, women, right? Yeah. So it just makes me think, like, first of all, it's incredibly sad and horrifying to think of what some of these people, especially women, are going through. But second of all, it makes me think in a lot of ways, we're not that far off. You know, we're not that far removed. You know, we can look at that and say, wow, that's wild. Like, I can't believe somebody would let that happen. But then we're really not that far removed from that in a lot of ways.
Unfortunately, it's the secrets. It's the secrets that haunt. And I hate the word victim. That's the wrong word. It should be victimized. I'm a verb person.
Yeah.
So victim is a noun, victimized is a verb. And that's totally inappropriate, that violates any sort of belief system that I can relate to, that the integrity, the holiness, if you will, of an individual, that is sacred. Their space, their identity, their calling, that must be honored. Period.
Yeah.
Our church has an expression: never place a period where God has placed a comma, and that works well for as an expression of our wanting to probe further into God's word and God's world. But we noticed after that advertising campaign came out, Liberty University, Jerry Falwell and his people came up with an alternative approach: never place a comma where God has placed a period. God has spoken.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Well, I think we can agree that the everyone's life and body and soul is their own, and is to be. It's a gift of God, born in God's image. And apologies to those with other belief systems, but that's where I come from with the when I meet someone, I always want to look for that spark of God within them.
Yeah.
And when you look for that spark of God within them, then any thought of any inappropriateness in a relationship, I think, then just disappears. And so that's my personal response. But clearly, I think we're in full agreement where in between human law and God's law that the body is God's own creation and cannot be violated.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a difficult thing. I think we get so mired in the systems and institutions that we've built to protect ourselves and really to protect the power that's being held, that we forget about people and individuals and that they are individually created in God's image, and that they do have autonomy and the will to live out their life and make their own decisions, right?
Yes.
So, and that doesn't mean that people are without accountability, but when our systems are actively oppressing people, specific groups of people in particular, then I think it's time to take a look at the system and not the person.
Agreed.
So I'll step off my soapbox and we can go back to your story. But so how long were you in Ohio?
We were there for 3 years.
Okay.
It was 3 interesting years. We did a lot of talking within our family, my wife and our 3 children. And we did feel, despite all the difficulties that we had, that our children had, we did feel called there. Just before we arrived, a member of the church, he was president of the men's club. He had just been recognized as teacher of the year in the local grade school. And he's the one who brought flowers for the altar and brought the little old ladies in to church, those ladies who couldn't drive any longer. He did everything. If you had a congregation filled with Larrys, you could rule the world. But Larry came out of the closet in 1994 with full-blown AIDS.
Oh.
And in a community of 279, an Oneida bomb couldn't do more damage than the release of that knowledge. This all happened just before we arrived.
Okay.
And there were meetings held at our church because it was kind of the largest public meeting place in the community. And there were doctors saying, well, we just don't know how this disease is spread, which is, just dreadful.
94?
1994.
Wow.
Yes. And so Larry was released from his teaching job, but he he was a lifelong member of the church. And so we knew of Larry's story before we arrived. So I remember that our first day at the church where we met Larry, walked up to Larry, and I knew that was going to be a defining moment. It just, there's no gray. It's either or. I'm a great believer in both and, but at that time it's either or. And at that point, that Larry holds out his hand to shake mine, and I hold out my arms to give him a hug, and that defined the next 3 years, because those who had an understanding of Larry and his disease were glad for me to affirm his personhood, and those who saw him as a threat, as evil, they turned away, saying things like, "I won't come back to that church unless Larry confesses his sin on his knees before the cross of Christ." Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry, we won't be seeing you anymore. And Mother said, "My children are afraid to come to this church." And said, "Well, I'm sorry, you might take your things, and I'm sorry, we won't see you anymore." So it was, day one. that was day one.
Yeah, you made your impression. Yeah.
Yeah, the president of the church council resigned on my second Sunday.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it went, I was about to say it went downhill fast, but it didn't go downhill. It just went in a different direction than we had anticipated.
Yeah.
Very quickly. But we presented a view of community. You and I, we just talked about the power of the individual versus the power of the community. And there you have it. It's a both and.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so how does one create a community that honors individuals? Isn't that's an oxymoron, it seems. But that's what we sought to do over those 3 years. Larry died about a year and a half later. We had his funeral on Super Bowl Sunday. The church was packed, I think as many with onlookers as mourners. But we had the choir sing from the Akron Opera Group came and sang "The Heavens Are Telling," and it was a grand release and honoring of all that Larry had been in his life, all that was good. From there, about a year later, we dedicated his AIDS quilt and sent that off to San Francisco. And I think at that point, the church said, well, we've had just about enough of John and his family. And they invited me to look elsewhere, which we did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you have a lot of people stick around because they were in support of the position you took, or did you have people kind of stick around because they had not a lot of other options?
I think there's a little bit of yes to both. Again, we were the only church in town, but I think ultimately those who remained were supportive of an inclusive, loving. One of the words I use at the beginning when I lead worship is, no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. And I think when people hear that gives them a clue as to what they will experience within that community.
Yeah.
So yes, there were people who remained for that, but again, we were the only congregation in town. They still let me ride in the convertible on the Memorial Day parade. Followed by the Waynedale Marching 20 as we made our way from the firehouse to the cemetery.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, your story gives me hope because I think there is so much value in community. And it's one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast, because I think there is so much value in connection and stories. But I think when we try to make the rules of community this standard for entry, it can be really difficult to actually carry out the tenets of community. And so I'm encouraged to hear that in your corner of the world in the 90s, in this, rural part of Ohio, that there was somebody like you for Larry at his, most difficult time in his life.
Well, it was, we received from Larry so much. I mean, we were largely naive in many ways, but Larry was so giving and open and honest with us that we feel blessed to have known. There's a scripture that means a lot to me in Genesis chapter 12, when God calls Abram and Sarai to leave. God says, "I will bless you that you might be a blessing." And I felt rather than our being a blessing for Larry, he was a blessing for us and for me personally.
Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah, I think, interactions like that change you. They are part of they imprint on you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you were invited to leave Ohio. Where was your next adventure?
We went to another rural church in Indiana, in Huntington, Indiana, Dan Quayle's hometown.
Okay.
Huntington is the location of the only vice presidential library in the United States.
Okay.
And so please, when you go through Indiana and Huntington, stop by and see the Dan Quayle Vice Presidential Library and spend an hour or so there. Huntington was another smaller, it was a county seat, so a little bit larger. And we did some good things there. And two of my daughters started off college, and two of my boys graduated from high school, and we sort of launched them. And we had six decent years there. There were some similar issues of parochialism in Huntington, but there was no significant issues.
Yeah.
I can't say we were, it was six years of doing good, solid ministry.
Yeah. I find it really interesting that you lived in, I guess outside of Iowa when you were in school, but you lived in pretty urban areas, pretty large areas. And then your first assignment, as it were, is in these like super rural, like you couldn't get more rural areas almost. So how was that for you, just mentally and emotionally, to be kind of thrown into that? Did you even, were you aware on a, maybe intellectually you knew, but that this even existed, you know what I mean? Like that these were that there were communities like this.
Yeah, I'd agree. We often talked among ourselves as to what God really had in mind for us throughout all these experiences. And again, while there were difficulties, I guess I'll have to confess there was a bit of an ego stroking in that the pastoral office was one was honored within those communities. And so in Huntington, I was a member of the Rotary Club and was elected to the board of directors and invited to give opening prayers at city council. And I met with city and community leaders regularly to talk about community issues. That was different in Huntington, that there was an openness to want our participation in community affairs. So to that extent, it was enjoyable. You know, I remember I often sat across from the circuit court judge there at Rotary Club, and sometimes members of our church would appear before the judge on a criminal matter. And I remember the judge saying, "Reverend, what are we going to do with this guy?" And he was serious. I mean, and so we would work out. And I said, well, here's what the church can do, and maybe here's what you should do in your office, and let's see if we can, work together to solve this problem. There was a wonderful widow lady in our congregation. She and her husband had owned a small grocery store. And after her husband died, she couldn't continue, and the Krogers and so forth began to take over the market. And she donated the grocery store we created a nonprofit, and we converted that grocery store into food pantry, into a clothing closet, into small appliances, into here's how to interview. And it was a resource for people who had been knocked on their patootie, and to get them, dust them off, clean them up, give them food, and get them back into the community.
Yeah.
That was that felt really good to be able to transform that and have that as a resource for the entire community, not just for our church. It was a county-wide resource.
Yeah.
So when the judge says, "Reverend, what are we going to do with so and so?" Well, I could say, here's the organization that we have, and here's what we can do for him or her as a part of the legal requirements that you have. But we gave him options.
Yeah.
And I think he appreciated that we just weren't going to throw someone in jail for a couple months. That wasn't going to solve anything. And these weren't, significant crimes. They were drunken, disorderly, and maybe minor theft or stealing a check or something. But, these are things that can be rehabilitated and reconciled, if you will, with the community.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I think that, I have made my feelings clear on how harmful sometimes the insular aspect of small community can be. But I think that I also am a very big fan of both and I think there's wonderful things to be said for it as well. And the idea that, small communities know how to come together. They know how to band together. They know how to invest in each other, sometimes too much. But, I think it is a strength. And I think that if you haven't lived in that community, that type of community, you wouldn't know that that's what that's like. Just like someone in that community couldn't, imagine what living in an urban setting would be like. And so there's good and bad in both. But I think it's so wonderful to, in that specific way, to talk about rehabilitation and reconciliation. There was a podcast, I'm going to butcher this because I remember the sentiment of it, but I don't remember all of the details. But there was a podcast I was listening to years ago, and the woman was interviewing somebody else, and the interviewee was talking about how where she came from, it was a country in Africa, and I don't remember which one, and I apologize. But she said, one of the big tenets of our community is that if anybody breaks the law or gets in trouble with the law, we take community responsibility for that. We say, what have we done as a community to fail that person so that this happened? And that's a pretty radical idea, especially in America.
Yes.
But how much better would things be if we could all collectively come beside somebody and say, what was missing in your life that this is where you went? And so I think smaller communities are more set up for that because they're already doing it in a lot of ways.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I love that. I love that you went from Ohio, which was good and hard, and Indiana was a little bit more, you got to accomplish a little bit more maybe in the community, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think that's a good assessment. We would go with that.
So where from Indiana?
And then I'd like to say that God called us home back across the Ohio River.
Okay.
Back to the land of barbecue and sweet tea. Oh, thank you, Jesus. He called us to Richmond, Virginia.
Okay.
And we were, for those of you who don't know Richmond, Virginia, it is the former capital of the Confederacy. I remember in my interview, I wasn't sure exactly about the feelings and sentiments within this congregation. It was a good old German congregation. But I remember in the interview making reference to the war between the states. And at that point, I looked over in the corner and I saw two men nod at each other. And I knew at that point that I would be offered the position based on my use of the word war between the states,
okay,
as opposed to civil war.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And it's I don't want to make too much, because it was a loving urban congregation. We were right on the fringes of Virginia Commonwealth University. We're in the state capital. There's the University of Richmond and Virginia Union University, all nearby, and the Virginia Commonwealth University hospitals. It was a fantastic experience. But I just remember at the beginning, I knew that there was some sensitivity. Well, my goodness, Jeb Stuart was outside of our church. There is in Richmond at that time Monument Avenue, and there were monuments that were erected at the turn of the century from 18 to 1900. Mm-hmm. So in going from east to Jeb Stuart, Robert E. Lee, Jeff Davis, Stonewall Jackson, and his name was Maury. He was on the cabinet in the Confederate government. And the last statue, the farthest west, Arthur Ashe, the African-American tennis player who won Wimbledon. So you have these 5 statues to Confederate heroes. It's the home of the Daughters of the American Confederacy and Arthur Ashe. So it was an interesting time that we arrived. By the way, all 5 of the Confederate statues have since been taken down. Mm-hmm. And so Jeb Stuart no longer guards the front door of our church on Monument Avenue. And that was a painful time of self-reflection in that community. But that happened after we left.
Okay.
Thank you, Jesus. But it was a wonderful, wonderful time. That congregation just caught fire, and we had a wonderful 10 years. Again, I was able to be active within the community and interact like with the editor of the Times Dispatch, the newspaper, and be active within the community. And Linda was active in the community as well. Yeah. So we enjoyed those 10 wonderful years. It was a good way to end our ministerial calling.
Amazing. And so from there, you moved back to North Carolina?
As I was preparing for retirement, I went to see a counselor, just sort of as a preparation, a transitional time of discussion. And I remember him saying, John, don't retire from something, retire to something. Yeah. And welcome, Chester. And I had always enjoyed writing. And I took a class from a Virginia Commonwealth University English professor. And there were about 6 or 8 of us in a group. We'd meet at night for a couple of hours and we'd write papers. And it was fun. We developed a class mantra. Where's the conflict? As people would submit papers, they said, well, this is interesting, but where's the conflict? And I sort of adapted that to say fiction should have friction.
There you go.
There you go. It's not interesting unless there's a conflict to be resolved. And don't we love other people's conflicts, not our own? We hate those.
Right.
Boy, do we love seeing how other people respond, react, or not to conflict in their own lives.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I love that you kind of just had a plan for after you were going to be retired. I think it's so important, and it keeps you young in a lot of ways. You're not that everybody that retires is aimless in any way, but just the idea that I think so much of our identities gets caught up in what we do, which is problematic anyway, but for the lack of having actually processed that, having something else that means something to you, that, you get value from and that you pour value into, I think is important.
It's important for a married couple, certainly, because a lot of wives don't want their husbands alphabetizing their spices and rearranging their kitchens. It is one of my mentors said, and don't forget within your new home that each of you needs his or her space, physical separation. And that was, again, another little bit. So, Linda and I are separate. We call them offices. But there's our spaces in which we can do our own thing, and we're not on top of each other, 16 hours a day.
Yeah.
So that's important. But I caught fire with the writing, and Linda enjoys her crafts and her birding and her wildlife advocacy. And
cool.
And so it's a good marriage, good relationship.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. That's wonderful. I mean, she sounds awesome. I've not met her, but the journey that you guys have been on together, it sounds like you certainly have each other's backs in a lot of ways. So
how long will it be? It'll be 57 years this summer.
Congrats. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Certainly something to celebrate. So your germ of an idea 30 years later, I'm sure that's not the first thing you started. Well, it's not the first thing you started writing because you have another published novel. But what was it that solidified for you that this was a story that you had to tell?
It wouldn't leave me. And I think, as I phrased it wasn't mine to keep. It was a story that needed to be told. And it's at so many different levels in our world today, in which there are issues of sexuality and issues of marital issues and family issues. And it was a story that wouldn't leave me. Yeah. And I think part of what took me so long is I wanted to write it as well as the story deserved. Mm-hmm. And when I first retired, I simply didn't have those skills. I may not have them now, but they're better now than they were 10 years ago. And that's why this is my second book and not my first.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. You're making me think a lot. Because I that is a goal of mine. I've always loved to write, so I would love to finish something.
Yeah. Well, I encourage you to do so, and that Jeff Bezos and others make it easy to do so. But it's find yourself a group of other folks, and just to meet regularly
Yeah.
and meet and talk about your writing. I found a group here in Charlotte, and I was, well, I guess I am the only male.
Okay. Good for you.
There are about 7 other women in the group, so I'm definitely odd man out, literally, in that case. But I remember I said I've got issues in this book that are very sensitive, and I want to set them down in a way that's honest but also appropriate. And so I said, please help me make these characters come to life and make them real. But don't let me cross the line into something that's just, well, inappropriate.
Yeah. I think that's a great point, because I think honest storytelling is necessary, and we shouldn't shy away from things that are unpleasant just because they're unpleasant. But there is a time when it becomes exploitative.
Yes.
And so finding, where that is super important, because not everybody walks that line well.
Yeah, good point. Yes, I totally agree. And so it was interesting that I have my book East of Apple Glen is written in what's known as close third person.
Okay.
Through Nathan, the male character. So everything you see and hear and understand is through his mind, through his eyes. But he has a friend, his next door neighbor, Robbie, short for Roberta, who's lesbian, but they have grown up and known each other since birth, and so I wanted Robbie to be a three-dimensional, a full dimensional character. So that's the women in the group were very helpful, and of course they gravitated. They loved Robbie, and in fact, Robbie was not her first name. That was the name that I won't say they selected, but they affirmed, and they. Again, they love Robbie. They love Robbie, and said, "No, Robbie would never do that." Yes, that's something Robbie would do. Yes, you need to work on that, develop that. And said, "No, don't let Robbie do that. She would never go there." So, so really, even though my name was on the cover of the book, there are about 7 women who have contributed immensely to the character of Robbie O'Malley in my book.
That's amazing.
And that's wonderful.
Yeah. You're encouraging me. Now I'm going to go look for a group near me.
Good.
It's wonderful.
Good.
This may be I don't know if you want to answer this question, but, talking about these issues and you being a pastor in your previous life, one of your previous lives, what do you think is the role or the responsibility of people such as yourself, people with a platform or with a voice to speak to these issues these days, especially in the current climate that we find ourselves in?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think there is a hunger for truth in our world, and even truth has been manipulated into truthiness and alternative facts, and that really is very upsetting for me personally, and I think it's not healthy for our country, for our community. I wrote recently, there's an entry on my blog, The Power of One. It's so, I have been amazed in both my professional life in healthcare and in my pastoral ministry and just observing the world, how one or a small group of people can alter the course of an organization. And it's amazing how a group will be deferential to one or a small group of people, or if they're not deferential, they're intimidated.
Yeah.
And so I see in part through Apple Glen as that story of Apple Glen of inverting the power of one to the liberation through the power of one. There is a small group of bad guys, evil characters in the book, and yet here we have two 20-something-year-olds who know that something evil is going on and it is inappropriate, it needs to be confronted, needs to be redeemed, needs to be repaired. And so I guess that's taken that onto myself as a way of speaking truth to power.
Mm-hmm.
One of my seminary professors recently released a book, Reading the Psalms Again for the First Time. And it's a wonderful, wonderful little book. And he speaks of two Psalms, Psalm 82, which I'm not expecting anyone to have that off the top of their head, but Psalm 82 is not a prayer, it is a story. And it is a story in which the heavenly court, God's heavenly court, puts the little g gods of Palestine, or the little g gods of that part of the world, on trial, and puts them on trial for not pursuing justice for the people, for the citizens of the world. And that story has got to be, in round numbers, 3,000 years old, potentially, the roots of that, because it goes back to certainly pre-Jesus days. Then there's another Psalm, 72, in which, for those who would want to read just 4 verses, has a job description for the king. So if as you read through the Psalms, you see a number of prayers at the coronation of the King of Israel. And this Psalm 72 has the job description for the king. And basically, there are two main qualities: justice and righteousness, defending the poor and uplifting the downtrodden. I think that's a wonderful job description. Wouldn't it be wonderful if our political leaders of all stripes would see that as their job description to create a world that is more just and promotes right living?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you, and I think too it's difficult to walk in. I think it's important, but it's not easy to pursue justice in grace. And because it's very easy to get very emotional, and I think that's valid in a lot of ways, but to not lose the grace part of any of this, and in the sense that we're always dealing with people, and everybody that we come across is a human being, created in the image of God. So it's a difficult line to walk, though. It's not an easy place to be, and it's exhausting.
Yeah. I mean, life is hard.
Yeah.
What was that song? I never promised you a rose garden, and yeah. Life happens, and it's our response. Here's my mathematician coming out of me. As I was creating models for healthcare expenditures and doing that economic analysis, you have a function with so many explanatory variables, but at the end of that equation, there's a little Greek letter called epsilon. And those are factors that over which one has no control. They are things that can happen unpredictably, and it can be anywhere from an illness to an earthquake that happen and can change the trajectory, at least temporarily. And one has to then adapt to that. So that is how we handle our epsilons. I think is how we live our lives, and I think it's for those who have a more rigid or narrow perspective. I guess I'll grieve that such folks miss opportunities to receive grace, as you said. Just as, it would have been nice if I didn't have Larry in my first church and we could have just had a wonderful time with a vibrant youth group and so forth. But Larry's was an epsilon in my first church. And he became that blessing for me personally and for those who took the time to listen and know him.
Yeah.
And I believe you used that expression in in one of your releases. To listen to someone is to know them, and to know them is the path to love them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And be loved by them.
Yeah, it goes both ways for sure. Yeah, when you give love, you are opening yourself up to receive it as well. It is, and
that point of vulnerability is not easy.
No.
And I think men may struggle with that. Can I generalize that? I think, I have in my book two men who were not present physically, but they're present in memory, Bill Sherwood and Robert O'Malley. And I have a line there. They shared tools, not feelings.
Yes. That's that's apt.
Isn't that a manly thing?
Yeah. But I appreciate the conversations that are happening seemingly more and more frequently around this. And I will say most of the people that I've interviewed are women. But this trip in the past month, I think I've interviewed more men. I've definitely interviewed more men than women. And that's the first time that's happened. And I'm so happy to do so because I do think that, there needs to be more men speaking in love and grace and empathy and vulnerability. My podcast isn't about getting up there and putting on a show. It is about vulnerability. So I am so grateful for every man that chooses to come on and talk with me and be their vulnerable selves, because I think that anybody that does that is making a huge difference. But I know the social currency for men, it costs more right now.
It certainly in the short run, when I think it's good that we examine the metrics by which we examine our lives. And for so often the metric has been, it can be everything from income and wealth and cars and clothes. For men, trophy wife, successful children, or whatever. But the metrics as I have received, let's say, over my life are much broader and have certainly changed me. Let's see, what is the line from The Wiz or from Wicked? Change you for the better.
Yeah. You may not have changed. You've changed me for good.
Yeah, you've changed me for good. Yeah. So, and that's how I received that. Would it be all right if I went back a little bit in my life story? Because we really have talked a lot about what I've done, but not about the other half of my life. We have 5 children. And the clever line I came up with is we have 2 by merger, 3 by acquisition. So So Linda and I started off, I think, it was like the first time we kissed, she got pregnant. Boy, that was easy. Gracious, that was scary. So when we were ready to start our family, we had a beautiful boy, had my son. And then when we were ready for think about a second, nothing happened and nothing happened and nothing happened and nothing happened. We tried the fertility route and nothing happened. So we said, all right, let's think about adoption. And so Pete was approaching nine years old or so. And we got word of a beautiful little girl, 3-year-old girl, available to us in eastern North Carolina. And so we adopted Chrissy. Although Chrissy was very wise for her years. I remember when we were having that first conversation, she was interviewing us. We weren't interviewing her. She was interviewing us. And she said, "Do you beat your son?"
Oh.
Said, No, we don't beat our son.
Oh.
But, now wasn't that a revealing question for her to ask as a 3-year-old? Chrissy is a beautiful little multiracial child. And I just say that not that you need to know that, but she brings, again, so many different backgrounds into her life and into her love and into our family. So we adopted Chrissy, and wouldn't you know, within months, Linda became pregnant. And
of course.
And while Linda was about 6 months pregnant, we got that epsilon of a phone call at 2 a.m. from Linda's father that Linda's sister and husband and 2 of their 4 children had been killed in a car accident.
Oh my gosh.
And their two children survived, but the other 4 were killed instantly. And so we got 2 more children.
Wow.
So we got a niece and a nephew, and we went from 1 child to 5 in about 18 months in round numbers.
Wow.
And is that not a recipe for a difficult path? But it has a happy ending because here we are now, some 40 years later, and we have 5 beautiful, successful children, and we are, if I can say, we are a family. And it is interesting because as we show pictures or as people who don't know us come to see us, they have to kind of wonder now which one's natural and which one's adopted, but that has all faded. We are family, and we love and share together. And it's not that the journey hasn't had some bumps and so forth along the way, because life happens. But we've been so blessed by these 5 beautiful children, and now to see them grow and have families and careers of making a difference in the world. So Linda and I feel so blessed there to have this 5 children in our lives.
Amazing. Are they local to you?
3 of our children are local. Okay. 1 in St. Louis. He learned to love St. Louis when we were in seminary. Okay. And 1 down in the Savannah area, Georgia. Okay.
Yeah, so not too far.
Yeah, not too far. So, good. All pretty close. And here locally, we've got 3, 6, 8. I think that's right. Grandchildren. I'll have to do some ciphering, but I think we have about 8 grandchildren.
That's fun.
Yes,
that's a lot of fun. Yeah. My parents are in that stage right now with my brother's kids, and it's a lot of fun, and I enjoy being an aunt. So it's a good time. Yeah. So I do have one last question for you, which is, through the lens of your experience, what does compassion mean to you?
Yeah. All right, I'll start with the seminary interpretation. Compassion. It's cum and passio. That's the two parts of the word, cum and passio. And I'll start with passio. Passio is suffering, but it's also disease. And break disease into its two parts, dis-ease. So, all right, passio, suffering, and dis-ease. So how does one deal with suffering and dis-ease? And my answer is the cum, the with. The compassion is when we feel helpless, when we don't have bank accounts, when we don't have training as pastors or therapists or counselors or doctors, even, we can be with. We can be with. And it's so important sometimes to enter a place of suffering and disease. And I know people, what do I say? What do I do? And sometimes you just sit, maybe reach out a hand, and if it's taken, all right. But being with others. And I think that extends in socially. I mean, we see that, I think many of us see that through the lens of an individual. You know, we may have dealt with a death in our family or a parent or a grandparent, and so we go and sit by that individual. But what if we were to sit with another culture, another background, another orientation, if you will, another preference, and choose your word. And rather than try to talk and speak and tell what your understanding is, first just sit and be with. So that's my understanding of compassion. And it's been so beautiful to have been privileged to sit with people so very, very different from my own upbringing and my own world view and my own life experiences, and just listen and be with them.
Yeah. Wow. I love that answer. And I didn't know the disease part of compassion or passio. So that's really interesting. And it adds another layer and depth to the word. So thank you for sharing. But John, thank you so much. Your openness, your candor, and your commitment to, doing what you're doing and being with is just a breath of fresh air, truly. So thank you. And thank you for sitting down with me and telling your story.
Well, and I think for the community that you have, or that we have created this morning, is so important for those listeners who really have no one to be with at this time. They do have you to be with, and to know that you are with them, would be with them if you could, but are with them through your voice and through your love and through your life experiences. I think that's so very important in our world that has maybe grown somewhat isolated through various circumstances. Now to have a community to be understood and heard.
Yeah, exactly. Who you are and where you are, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you once again. And we will link to you in the show notes so people can find out more about you and grab your books as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Human Experience. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, share it with your friends and family, share it on social media, and rate and review it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can also support the podcast financially by going to my website, thehxpod.com, linked in the show notes, and clicking on Donate. It takes a lot of time and resources to create this podcast, so every little bit helps. Everyone has a story, and I'd love to hear yours. So be sure to check out the show notes for more information about how to stay in touch. Do good and love well.